Okay, hello everybody. We'll be starting, and just as people come in, I'll go through the introduction. So this can be our third and final CARS lecture. We're going to be covering main idea and details, specifically strength and weaken claims. Okay. This is going to be just like similar to the last CARS sections. We're going to have a lot of practice for you with the passages and questions. And I'll be mostly letting you just work through it because, like I said, I believe the best way to improve at CARS is to get more practice. Okay. In case this is your first time joining, my name is Mark Abdurrahmanov. I'm a recent graduate of Stony Brook University. I recently took the MCAT this January and I scored a 520. Here's my email in case you ever want to ask me any questions or get any information. Feel free to contact me anytime. This is a 15-week full course. We're having 3 lectures per week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So this is the final lecture of this week. We'll also be having office hours once per week for now, Sundays at 8:30, so tomorrow. We'll be covering most of the highest yield MCAT content throughout this course, and all lectures will begin at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just like, and so will the office hours. Okay. This is the link to the GroupMe. So the GroupMe will have all the lecture recording links and PowerPoints posted. We'll also be posting any updates or changes to scheduling here. It's an easy way to get a hold of me or Tim or any of the other tutors rather than email. You can simply just add us. And here's, if anybody needs my contact information, the email and okay. So in terms of, sorry about that. Okay, I just had to move something. So in terms of learning objectives, so today we're going to be learning on how to use the wording of the MCAT to answer its questions. We talked previously about main idea and all these topics that I wanted you to know, but mostly we've been talking about how to get them from the passage. Now we're going to be kind of talking about how to answer questions, like how to answer questions specifically for the MCAT. We're also looking at what are the ways that the MCAT will try and trick us. So we covered this a little bit in Chris's lecture last week on CARS, but we'll be going more into that. How will the questions and answer choices be structured? This is an important note as well. We can get the main idea or we can make inferences, but if we don't know how to answer questions or we don't know what the question or answer choices are stating, it's kind of meaningless. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the content. Okay. So just to review from our previous CARS lectures, we've already discussed common main ideas that you will see in passages. And we've discussed ways to apply the passage to the answer choices in Chris's lecture. What we want to be able to do now is to be able to convert the main idea into our own words, from our own words into the MCAT words. So like I mentioned in the first lecture on CARS, where I gave you common main ideas, they were some like, is the author trying to explain something? Is the author comparing 2 different things? Is the author praising or critiquing something that he doesn't like or likes? Now, if you see a question that asks you, what is the main idea of this passage, or what is the main idea of maybe this paragraph in the passage, right? They won't have it in those words. They'll have their own words for the answer choices. And you have to be able to recognize which answer choice best matches what you think the answer is, right? So once we read through the passage the first time, we should have our own version of a main idea already decided. As I said, by your first full read through, you should already have an idea of what you think the passage is about specifically. Sorry about that. However, if we are asked explicitly what the main idea is in a question, which sometimes they will do, they'll ask you what is the main idea of this passage, or maybe sometimes they'll even ask you what is the main idea of this paragraph in the passage, of like paragraph 3 or paragraph 4. the answer choices may not exactly match our own version because of the wording. And sometimes this can trip people up because they may not immediately recognize that one of the answer choices is actually similar to what they think the main idea is or what their interpretation is. And because that they may pick something else, or they may think that their interpretation was wrong, and they may waste more time trying to go back and trying to understand it. To work around this, you need to be able to break down each answer choice to see which one most closely matches your interpretation. The way I would suggest doing this is really take your time with each answer choice, read through all of them first, and then think exactly what is the answer choice kind of suggesting. So, for example, one of the common main ideas that I gave you is the author is trying to talk about, trying to maybe give the history of or describe something. But then I also gave you what that something may be, and it may be, for example, an idea that somebody had. So, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution. But it could also be about Darwin himself, about his life, about all of his achievements, about all of his works. And while you're reading it, you have to figure out whether the main idea is about himself, or about his one theory, or his one idea, or his book, or whatever. And I gave you hints before on how to do that. Now, once you reach the question, and the question has certain answer choices, now you have to determine in the answer choices, because the wording may not be exactly obvious, you have to determine, is the answer choice that's being presented, is it talking about him or his idea? And you have to decide which one the correct answer is and which one the answer choice is talking about. And if you decided that the main idea was about himself, not just his one idea, and the answer choice is talking just about that one idea, that's not the right answer choice. Okay, so pay attention to the exact wording and the exact specific thing that they're talking about. Again, this is all really abstract without practice, so that's why I said the best way to practice for cars is to actually take practice questions and practice passages. Because of that, I will be sharing in the chat, just like with the previous lectures, a practice passage, which Chris posted in the chat. That's a Google Doc that leads to both the passages that we'll be covering today. If you this is for people who like highlighting or just reading it over at their own pace. If you want, you can go to the Google Doc and you can just download it as a Word document. And once you do that, you'll be able to do whatever you want with your version of the passages. If you don't wish to do that right now, I also have the passages on screen right here that you can read off. But once we go into the questions, they won't be on screen anymore. So I highly recommend that you go onto the Google Doc. Okay. I'll be giving you guys about, normally to answer, to read the passage and answer all the questions, you have 10 minutes. I'll be giving you about, and usually the passage itself would take about 5 minutes. I'll give you guys 7 minutes to read the passage, and then we'll move on together, okay? And then we'll go into some practice questions. For anybody that's just now joining us, we're just reading the practice cards passage. There's also a Google Doc in the chat, and then we'll be answering questions afterwards. Okay. I'll give about 1 more minute to read the passage. If we were going off of real MCAT conditions, right now would be about the stopping point for the passage, but because this is practice, I'm giving you more time. Okay, so please take another minute or so. Okay, we'll be moving on. Okay, so please take a minute to answer this question. I'll start up the poll. And just like the last lecture too, if you really don't have an idea what the answer is, there's a fifth option that you can always choose. And that'll let me know to go over it more, but I'll go over it regardless. Okay. Okay, I'll give you guys about another minute or so. So get your answers in. Okay, another couple of seconds. All right, and the poll. Okay, so the majority of people picked B, with D coming in as a close second. And this is exactly what I would expect. The correct answer actually is B, fiscal prudence. I imagine the reason a lot of people picked D, higher taxes, is because they believe that, because a lot of the passage was talking about kind of why we need more taxes, or like the benefits more taxes could provide. But this is also what I was talking about with the be very careful with the specific wording. So the main idea was that the author is an advocate of including more taxes, and more specifically varied taxes. However, the answer choice D says higher taxes, which is different from more taxes. Higher taxes means you could have only one tax, but you just pay a lot more for it. Whereas what the author is actually saying in the passage is actually to have a lot of different taxes, but not necessarily have them equaling a large sum. Okay, so more and higher are a little bit different, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the MCAT wording is trying to trick you. Okay, fiscal prudence means kind of being a little bit more not like very easy, very like, I don't want to say like stingy, but more like kind of like reserved with your spending, or kind of smart with your spending. And that's not really applying as much to the average everyday person, but rather to the government. They shouldn't be unnecessarily spending, or they should be kind of being more smart with the way they spend and the way they collect money, both, right? Fiscal, many of you know, means financial. Prudence is kind of being more like smart with it, or being kind of like reserved with it. So meaning taking in more for a smart amount, and also only using it when necessary. States' rights. that's not really talked about at all in this passage. He does talk about states having the power to tax or the right to tax individually from each other, but he doesn't really give his opinion on it one way or the other. So I wouldn't. So that's really kind of not the correct answer. Decrease taxes. Again, we don't really know that. He does want more taxes, but that doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't want decreased taxes, because he could want just either the same amount or even less financially amount of taxes, just spread out more, right? And he could mean decrease tax in that sense, but he doesn't really specify that, so that's way too big of an assumption, whereas B is a lot safer. Mainly I gave this question because I wanted to kind of show you the how the level of detail in the wording and how they are trying to trick you with choice D, higher taxes versus more taxes. Okay, so be very careful with that. And this is just one example of how they'll try and use wording to trick you. Any questions about that before we move on to the next question? Before we move on to the next question, and we're still talking about the same passage, but I want to talk about another idea. This idea is the strengthen and weaken types of questions. And if you've taken any practice tests or practice cards material, likely seen these questions are very common. More so, I think, than even main idea or any kind of other questions. These are one of the most common types of questions that you'll see. We did discuss them in the first cards lecture, but I just wanted to go into a little more. In order to understand these type of questions, you need to understand the author's argument and their reasoning for the argument. So the author is writing with a purpose, and if that purpose is to persuade or to make an argument, then they will likely use supporting evidence or give their reasoning for it, right? Based on that reasoning and that evidence, you should be able to understand kind of like what their argument is and why they're saying what they're saying, what their reasoning is, right? Or kind of like what their purpose is. When they ask you a question that says, which of these details would most strengthen or most weaken the author's claims, you should look at the answer choices and go through this list of questions where you should ask yourself, does this relate to the author? Does this answer choice relate to the author's argument? If so, does it address the author's reasoning or main evidence? And if so, lastly, does this match or oppose what the author's argument is? And I highly recommend doing this for all three of, or all four of the answer choices. Now, let's go one by one. Starting with number one, does this relate to the author's argument? So, for example, we could even use this one as kind of an example. Part A, question, states' rights. This doesn't really relate to his argument. His argument is for varied taxes and more varied spending, right? So does this relate to it has nothing to do with the states' rights or any other kinds of rights or freedoms or anything like that. So it doesn't even relate to the topic that he's trying to talk about. Because of that, you can just eliminate it right away. Whereas the others, fiscal prudence, decreased taxes, and higher taxes, both do somewhat relate to his argument in one way or another. Next, does it address the author's reasoning or main evidence? So this is not strength and weaken question, is not as great of an example. And we'll talk more about it when we do a strength and weaken question right after. But what this means is the author has their reason for making this argument, right? So if they give you something that does address the argument in general, but it has nothing to do with that author's reason or their evidence, then it's also not really useful, right? So if, for example, and I gave this example in my first lecture when I talked about strength and weaken, if the author's argument is that we should cut all financial support for stem cell research because it's unethical and he doesn't believe stem cell research is ethical, then having one of the answer choices being in a strength and weaken question being stem cell research is very effective and produces many different types of medication, that it does address the author's argument of stem cell research, but it doesn't address the author's reason, which is unethical or unethical, right? It doesn't matter if it's effective. If he believes that it's unethical, saying it's effective is not going to actually strengthen or weaken his claim. It's not going to change his mind. It's not going to support him, and it's not going to oppose him, because it's not the exact reason that he stated, right? It's not part of the evidence that he is looking for. However, if you do, if his reason is, instead of ethical or unethical, if his reason is stem cell research is ineffective, having a detail that says stem cell research is effective or proof that stem cell research isn't effective would satisfy this requirement, and you would move on. And that means that would be an answer choice that you would continue to look at. Lastly, you just want to find out, does this match or oppose what the author's argument is? Is this exactly what the author, does this answer choice say exactly what the author is trying to say, or does it say the exact opposite of what the author is trying to say? If they match, then it's strengthening the author's argument. If it's directly opposed, it's weakening the author's argument. And whichever one you want is whichever one the question is asking for. Some of them will be strengthened, some of them will be weakened. You'll just have to go based on the question. This may be a little bit difficult to see right now, but we'll do a practice question right here. And I'll go back and I'll go through all these answer choices with that method. But I want you guys to try it out first. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes. And again, this is based on the passage that you guys just I'm not sure why. We're gonna end the poll in a bit. Somebody mentioned in chat that they can't submit. Try and maybe close and reopen the poll on your end. If you can't submit, it's fine because these aren't great or anything, but I just like to have an idea of what you guys want to think, what you guys think. But yeah, if you can't submit, unfortunate. Try closing the poll and then opening it up again, see if that fixes it. Okay, I'm going to close in a second. Okay. All right, so 40% of people pick D, with about an even 10 to 20% split between the other choices, including no answer. So the correct answer is D, which I'm happy the majority of people got. But let's go over why wasn't one of the other ones. Okay. So like I mentioned, the way I like to approach these strength and weakness questions is through these 3 questions. By asking myself these 3 questions, if they don't meet one of these questions, then I just eliminate the answer choice. So first, does this relate to the author's argument? And we discussed that the author's argument is the author's argument about taxing internet sales is that they do like to tax internet sales because they believe that the government is losing out on a lot of money that they could be making if instead they just taxed internet sales, right? A, younger people are more likely to make online purchases. Well, this doesn't really go past step 1 because this doesn't really relate to the argument. We know that they make a lot of online purchases, and he said that there's a lot of money that could be made through online sales, right? So this is not really a relevant statement. B, states without such a tax are poorer than those with one. This does meet criteria A, does relate to the author's argument, does address the author's main reason or main evidence, right? He believes that states should tax this because there's a lot, if they do tax it, they could be making a lot more money than they currently are, right? But does this match or oppose with the author's argument is that it actually supports what his argument is because states without such tax are poorer than those with one. That's exactly what he's saying. If you just tax those internet sales, you could be making a lot more money. So by that logic, you could assume that states that do have that tax are richer than those without one. And this is exactly what the answer is saying. So if the question was asking which of these would most strengthen, it would probably be B, but since it's asking weaken, B is eliminated. Taxing internet sales is unpopular with the majority of voters. So this is another one that a couple of people have chosen. The reason this isn't the correct answer is because we're not really looking at popularity of when we're talking about this. This kind of is in this second question. So it does relate to the author's argument of taxation for making money, but it doesn't really go into the evidence or the reasoning because he's not really concerned with what is popular. He's more concerned with how much money is it going to make the government, right? With D, it's more specific, so it's less likely to, people are less likely to move to states that tax internet sales. What this means is that if there are no people living in the state, then the state can't tax those people because they're not there, right? Because of that, they'll make less money, and there's no point in making sales tax if the income you actually get is lower, because not only are those people not paying internet tax because they're not there, they're also not paying any other kind of state taxes because, again, they're not in the state. I guess you could say that C kind of goes into D, but D is a lot more kind of straightforward. It's like more steps in, right? It's closer to the answer. Hopefully this kind of hopefully this cleared it up a little bit. A is just completely off topic. C is not exactly addressing his main reasoning or main concern. And B is doing the opposite. It's actually strengthening rather than weakening. Any questions about this so far? not, I'll move on to another question. This is not so much as a strength and weaken question as it is a question, an inference question about the author. Again, this involves main idea, and again, be careful with the wording, but this one's a little more straightforward. Okay, please take another 30 seconds or so to get your answers in. Okay. Yeah, the results, 33% people said D and 33% said C, 22 for B, and 11% didn't answer or were confused. So the correct answer is D. So let's go over this. So the author's arguments about taxation imply that they would be likely to oppose which the following. So we know what the author's argument about taxation is, right? He wants more varied taxes. So he wants to tax different types of things as much as possible. It's kind of like if you're in stock trading, you want to ideally diversify your portfolio. You don't want to put all your money into one stock or into one type of investment. You kind of want to vary it out. And the author is kind of saying the exact same thing here. You want to have a lot of different taxes for a lot of different things, because if, say, one thing starts to plummet as a result of just technology increases or changing of the times, you're not losing too much money because you still have all of these other things that are making you money. Whereas if you just had really high taxes in one thing, tomorrow, if that one thing loses a lot of value, you kind of just lost your only source of money, right? Based off that, we can see that A and B, we can try and eliminate right off the bat. Actually, can do this because taxing items purchased items purchased online is actually something that he himself suggested in the article, taxing online internet purchases. So it wouldn't be that. Taxing licenses to drive cars. That's another tax that adds more variety to your tax portfolio, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. So that would be a good thing. He would probably very much like that. Spending tax money on roads or abolishing taxes on childcare. So they don't talk about childcare. So this is an inference. So based on what you know about the author, from what you've just read about the author, what do you think the author would do in a situation that you don't like know the answer, but you have to infer, right? They never mention licenses to drive cars, tax money on roads, or abolishing childcare. You kind of have to infer what the author would think based on what you already know about him from the passage, right? So this information is not in the passage. It's the information needed to get here is in the passage, but you have to make inferences. The reason he wouldn't want to abolish tax on childcare is because just like licenses to drive cars or online purchases, childcare taxes are another tax, another varied tax to make your portfolio more varied, another source of income for the government, which he's very much in favor of. And so he wouldn't want to abolish a tax on childcare because he doesn't want to lose kind of like the variety in the tax portfolio. What he may suggest instead, you could infer, is maybe if the taxes are too high, lower all of the taxes a little bit, but you still maintain the variety. So it wouldn't be choice D. So choice D seems like the correct answer so far, because that's something he seems like he would be very opposed to. Spending tax money on roads. So he is he wants the government to have a little bit more money, but in the passage he mentioned that he actually, one of the reasons he wants the government to have more money is so they could spend it on things that people need. For example, he mentioned in the passage that the costs of healthcare and Medicare are rising rapidly, and if the government doesn't have enough money to pay that off, then we're not going to be able to give more Medicare, more healthcare. So what he's essentially saying, what you can infer from that, is that he's not opposed to spending money if it's needed, as long as you are making that money somehow, right? So if you have all these taxes to make the government money, he's not opposed to spending that government money on roads or things that people actually need, right? And we can see that this because he's not opposed to things like Medicare, right, which is the government spending money on its citizens' healthcare. He actually supports it, right, as long as the government does have the money from the taxes to spend on that Medicare, right? So that's why I think it's D, right? That's why this one was a little bit tricky. It may seem like he only wants government getting more money from taxes, but he also does want it. He wants it making a lot of money, but he also wants it spending a lot of money back to its citizens. And so he would not be opposed to spending money on roads. So somebody posted in the chat, does this quote also support choice C? Multiple alternatives would spread the tax burden, enhancing revenue elasticity in relation to broad competitions. Yes, so what he mentioned, and I'll go back to it actually here. So what he mentioned was actually, rather than reducing spending, he wants to increase the kind of like the amount of money left over after all the spending. The way he wants to do that is not by cutting spending, but by increasing revenue. And I can show that. Yeah, for here. So here, it was Medicare, it was Medicaid. But yeah, here he says that they're projected to grow. And notice how he's not saying we should cut this. Instead, he wants to keep it, and as long as you're just making the money to pay it back. And I'm going to show you here. Another way of looking at fiscal health is the total year-end budget balance as a percentage of expenditures. In other words, how much money is left over at the end of the year, right? The reason, and he says, in order to stay fiscally strong, states must diversify their revenue, right? So nowhere here does he ever mention anything about cutting any kind of spending. He wants to instead keep the spending, but as long as it's necessary, if he wants to keep it, just make more money so that you can afford the spending and you can still have a budget at the end of the year after all your spending. Is that clear to everybody, or do you guys want me to go over it again, or anything we've covered so far? Because after this, I'm going to be giving you guys a passage to read on your own, as well as questions to answer on your own, and we'll be going over it at the end. Okay. So again, here's passage 2. This one is a little bit trickier. This is, I specifically picked this passage because from what I've seen, history passages tend to be the most kind of like ones that people don't really know that much about innately, and they seem to be the most difficult because you don't really like have that much background on it. So I specifically did this to make it a little bit harder and a little bit prepare you a little bit better, but I posted the Google Doc again in the chat. Please take, say, another 7 minutes to read this. Okay. And then we'll answer some questions. Okay, please take another 30 seconds or a minute or so, and then we'll move on to the questions. Okay. So this is a main idea question, but unlike other main idea questions you may see, it's main idea of a passage rather than main idea of the whole, a main idea of a paragraph rather than the main idea of the passage as a whole. Okay. Okay, take another 30 seconds to a minute. And the poll. So the results were fairly evenly split, with C and D winning out slightly. Okay. Correct answer is D. And let's go over it. So this is a main idea, but it's of a specific paragraph rather than the passage. What I want to do is to go over this question. I don't even want to look at the passage. I just want to look at this one paragraph because I think you can get the answer without it. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one they asked for 5. So we're just looking at this. We're not even like concerned with the rest of the passage. And we can even read it together. The stagnation of the process for beatification, however, meant that martyrological momentum was lost for a long period. On an international level, the Irish martyrs have been overlooked, perhaps also due to the parochial nature of Irish historiography and the speed of success and great publicity for the cause of canonization of English martyrs. This neglect is perhaps most starkly illustrated in Brad Gregory's recent excellent book on the commonalities between accounts of early modern European martyrdom in the Catholic, Protestant, and Baptist communities, which ignores Ireland together. Okay. Now, let's look at the answer choices again and see which correlates. Ireland had little influence on international politics. Well, this one wasn't really talking that much about politics. It was talking about martyrdom mostly. It had nothing to do with politics. just looking at that paragraph had nothing to do with politics, especially international politics, I would say no. Few Irish martyrs were produced in the early modern period. So they said that there was very little exposure of Irish martyrs from the early modern period to the rest of Europe, which we could see from their absence in that book or from common knowledge. However, they never said there were none. They just said they weren't very well known or very well exposed, right? So I wouldn't really say that's the answer either. Irish martyrs are an essential component of Irish history. If you were doing the main idea of the whole passage, I would say C would be the best answer out of these four at least. However, we're just looking at the paragraph, and in this paragraph, it never mentioned how they were an essential component of Irish history. The only thing they ever mentioned was that there were very few of them known outside of Ireland at that time, right? So maybe they were an essential component of Irish history, but this paragraph specifically did not touch on that. D, non-Irish worshippers were unlikely to recognize Irish martyrs. That's exactly what this paragraph was about. Everybody outside of Ireland or didn't really know about Irish martyrs. They really only focused on the English ones, especially during this time period, as we can see from the book, which completely negated them. Okay. Any questions about this one? This one was a lot more split. So does anybody have any questions, or did that help clear it up a little bit? Still a little bit of confusion.
Yes, Mark, I had a question. So, so basically the main idea would be throughout the entire, what is it, the excerpt, because the question specifically asks for paragraph 5, we only want the main idea 5 and not for the.
Exactly.
How you tell us to, if it's only mentioned in one and not throughout, then that's not the main idea. So why did you make this?
It's not the main idea of the passage. That's correct. But this question didn't ask for the main idea of the passage. This question asked for the main idea or the summary of the 5th paragraph, right? If it asked for the main idea of the whole passage, D would not be the right answer, right? Because it was only, you're right, it is only in this one paragraph, but it just asked for the main idea of this one paragraph or the summary of this one paragraph. If the question was asking for the whole passage, it would be completely different. It's just pay attention to what the question is asking specifically for.
And one more question. So it's okay to go back to reread it, or if?
Oh, for sure. I would highly recommend it. I would not. I would highly recommend going back and rereading it. Like I mentioned, the first time you read it, most of the details will likely, like this is like really dense. Most of the details will be lost on you if they ask anything that's detail specific. So the first time you're reading it, just to get an idea of what's actually being said and what's actually going on. And then once you get something like this question, which says best summarize the 5th paragraph, and you're like, okay, I know the whole passage as a whole. Now I just want to look at the 5th paragraph, and now I just want to see what's going on in the 5th paragraph, right? And then you would have to like kind of refresh stuff what's on the 5th paragraph, because there's no way you would remember that just off one read through, like exactly what was written in the 5th paragraph rather than the 6th one or the 4th one. Mm-hmm. If you looked at the 6th one, then it's a completely different answer. If you look at the 4th one, it's a completely different answer. So I'd highly recommend going back.
Okay. So even though you're not finishing your passages, because I was thinking to just keep going, then go back, but just, I would probably forget what I read in this passage if I went to like 4 more passage down. So you recommend doing it there and not wait till you're finished with the entire exam?
So, okay.
I take a best
so
guess.
Somebody, okay, and somebody asked this in the chat as well, had a concern about timing. You have 10 minutes for each passage. If you just read it once and then just if you just read the passage once and then go through all the questions once, never going back to the passage, then move on to the next passage, you're at most going to get 2 or 3 of the 5 questions for the passage right. There's no way, and because a lot of them, I'm giving you main idea ones. Some of the questions are like very specific details that there's no way you'll pick up on a first read through. So you're essentially, by doing that, you're forfeiting those questions automatically. You have to think, is it worth reading an entire passage, which is 6-7 minutes, or even 5 minutes if you're fast, just to get 2 of the 5 questions or 2 of the 6 questions? It's not really a good use of your time. It's better to get all 6 of those questions in take 12 minutes rather than read 3 passages for 15 minutes and then get 2 of those on each one and get 6 questions. You're saving on time and you're getting the same score. If you just fully do one passage, make sure it's good, go on to the next passage, make sure it's good. If it's a really hard passage, and you don't understand what's going on, just skip it. You don't have to do it, and then you can come back to it later. Find the easiest passages and do those first. You can always go back and forth. Some people like to read the questions first before they read the passage. If the questions they think are way too hard or something like that, they may just skip the passage. Sometimes if they know that a question is asking about a specific detail, even on a first read through, they'll know to look out for that detail. But it's up to you if you like reading questions first or reading passage first. That one's something you have to learn for yourself. I think both of those are valid. But sometimes I've heard this before, but never go back. I don't like that. I don't think that's a good strategy. I don't think that's the correct way to do it. Never going back. I think it's just not effective. I think it's more effective to just do a passage that you know, if you took the time, you could do it and just focus on that. Whereas questions first, that's definitely a good strategy. Yeah, okay, so your English lit class may have taught you, or so some classes may teach you, and everybody teaches differently. Everybody has their own preferences. Some people may teach you, even when you're doing the MCAT, some people may teach you, don't do this don't read the questions first, don't go back to the passage, don't do this, don't do that. Everybody's doing it based on their own experiences. You have to just try different things out and see what works for you. I think from my experiences, at least, going back to the passage is very helpful. Reading questions first can sometimes be helpful, sometimes not, depending on the person. Highlighting can be helpful or cannot be, depending on the person. So find what works best for you. I do like highlighting, keeping mental notes of details or main ideas or sentences that you think will be important later. Or if you read the questions first and you know, that could also work. Yeah, highlighting is a good tip. Reading questions first can be a good tip. But I do recommend going back to the passages, especially for detailed questions. Anything else before we move on to the next question? And sometimes, I know a lot of people, especially for cars, they struggle with time. I know it happens, and some people have problems with time, but I would think that, like I said, making sure you do maybe even less passages, maybe like 4 or so passages, but you get the most amount of questions in those 4 passages right as possible, can be more efficient than half-assing all of the passages and getting half of those wrong. So I think that's yeah, and try out, see what works for you. Try out both ways. I highly recommend doing a lot of practice tests, a lot of practice passages, and see which one gives you the best times and the best accuracies, right? And the best scores. So try out different ways and see which one works for you. Yeah. So I'm gonna go into this next question, and then we can answer more questions at the end of the lecture, because we're almost done. After, I believe there's 1 or 2 more questions after this, and then I'll leave it up to questions. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. So the majority of people picked answer B, 58%, with 8% for A and C and 17% for D. However, the answer is D. And let's go over it. So suppose that few Irish martyrs were involved in affairs of government while they were alive. How does this affect the opinions expressed in the passage? So this is kind of a main idea question, and also in a way a strength and weakness question. So the main idea of the passage, I would say, is that Irish martyrs are important in Irish history, and Irish martyrs are important in understanding the religious and political situations that Ireland, even in more modern times, faces as a result. So how does this statement that Irish martyrs were involved in affairs of government while they were alive impact that? Well, let's look to eliminate some easy answer choices. It supports the author's claims about Irish views of the English. He doesn't really make that many claims about Irish views of the English. Very few, other than they are maybe oppressors. In some ways, he says that a lot of Irish people view them as oppressors. But Irish martyrs being involved in government doesn't really relate to that at all. If we go back to our the three questions I asked before, this doesn't really relate to the main argument. So it's not that. It explains why the work of Dennis Murphy was successful. And this is, again, one that I would suggest going back to the passage, because you may not know, and I certainly didn't when I first read this. Like, I didn't remember who Dennis Murphy was or what his work was. But if you go back, you can just scan through it very quickly. I just did it right now, and I found it within 10-15 seconds. It takes almost no time. And you can remember the biographies published by writers such as Dennis Murphy, whose subsequent works aim to self-lives candidates following the individual stories of martyrdom, right? So let's go back to the question. It explains why the work of Murphy was successful. Well, how does that explain why his work was successful? It doesn't really relate to Dennis Murphy's works, right? Because it essentially, like, the martyrs being involved in affair of government is very irrelevant to what they were known for, right? What they were known for is really like the important thing that's written about. So A is not the right answer either. It weakens the author's argument about Irish martyrdom. What is the author's argument about Irish martyrdom? Again, it's that it's extremely important for Irish history and Irish like traditions, Irish history and Irish politics, even in modern times. How does this relate to? How does them being involved in government while they were alive relate to them being important historically and politically in modern times? It really doesn't, right? It's because it has almost no bearing to what they did during their lives. Again, has almost no relation to kind of like the author's point, which is once they were dead and they did whatever it is they were known for, it was very impactful on Irish history and Irish politics now. This has, like, what they did during their life, other than like that big thing that they were known for, it really doesn't matter, right? And like, because he didn't really talk about their lives at all. Mainly, only thing he talked about in this passage about the martyrs was their impact after they're dead. He doesn't talk about their lives at all. So that's why I would say none of these would be good answers, and D would be the correct answer. Does that make sense? It's because mainly he didn't really focus at all, or he didn't have any opinions or anything related to their lives in general, just what the impacts of their death was, or how their deaths were treated in subsequent years. Does that make sense, everybody? Because the vast majority of you did pick different answers. Sure. Go over C again? Okay. So it supports the author's claims about Irish views of the English. What is the author's claims about Irish views of the English? If you are, this is open to everybody. Can you guys put in the chat what you think the author's claims about Irish views of the English are? And this is for everybody, if you can. So the author claims the English were superior. So it's not what the author claims, it's what the author claims the Irish see, it's what the author claims the Irish think about English, right? And if you go back, I'll clear this. If you go back, yeah, exactly. They don't really like the English, they view them as oppressors. Right? Their narratives also Irish tradition of persecuted faith. Let's try and find it. They don't really like English rulers. Things like that, right? And there's multiple examples of this, right? So that, yeah, exactly. And somebody put it in the chat as well, right? So the author's claims about Irish views of the English is that they don't like the English. How would this support that opinion that the Irish don't like the English? If the Irish martyrs were involved in government while they were alive, it doesn't mention what their relationship was to the English, how they felt about the English rulers, how they felt about their religious persecution or their oppression. Doesn't mention any of that, right? So it has absolutely no connection. There's absolutely no connection between Irish martyrs and government when they were alive and their views about the English, right? There's no way to connect those two, right? Does that make sense? So it can't really support that claim, right? Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, I'm gonna move on. So I think this is the last question today, and then we're gonna wrap up. And then I'll take any questions you guys have about anything cards related. Okay. Please take a couple minutes with this. Please take another 30 seconds or so. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll. So 33% said B, 22% said A, 22% said C, and 22% didn't know. The correct answer is actually A. The results are fairly split, but the correct answer is A. Let's go over it. Again, what is the author's argument? And we've covered this a couple of times now. The author's argument.
Oh, I thought you were asking.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm just gonna go over it and then I'll ask questions at the end. So we've covered this a couple times. What are the author's argument? Actually, Opal, if you want to share the argument.
Oh, I think, like you said, the author's argument is that Irish martyrs are important in history and important in politics in modern day times.
You should be checked for tuberculosis.
Okay?
Increased risk of
infection. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's right. So
inflammatory bowel disease, tell your
sorry,
doctor.
whoever that is, could you please mute?
Reactions may occur.
Thank you. So we know that what the argument is, and Opal just mentioned it. Which of these would most weaken the author's argument, right? So which of these would directly go against it? Well, the author's argument is martyrs, as you know, are a religious thing, right? And what they're talking about is religious martyrs, Catholic martyrs, are an important aspect in modern Irish history and Irish politics, so worldly matters, right? So what that means is the author believes that religious matters are a precedent for worldly matters in modern Ireland. However, A goes exactly against that. The Irish believe that religious matters should be distinct from worldly matters, right? That's exactly the opposite of what he's saying. So that is one way to weaken his argument. But let's look at the others. The number of Irish who worship as Roman Catholics keeps dropping every year. Well, it's not exactly related to the argument of old religious figures being relevant even in secular aspects in modern times, like in politics or in history or culture, tradition, all of that. So because of that, it's not exactly related, and it could even be used as evidence to support his point. Even if the number of Irish who worship as Roman Catholics keeps dropping, they still maintain that sense of like the respect and the tradition for the martyrs, even though they themselves are not religious, right? It transcends their religion. Irish political figures are still quick to claim their affiliation with the Roman Catholic Church. Again, this could actually be again used to slightly strengthen the argument, because even in modern politics, you claim your affiliation with the Roman Catholic Church with these aspects, even though it's not exactly related, because it's more focused on the martyrs rather than just the church. But it could still be used, but it'll be used to strengthen rather than weaken. Roman Catholics are usually more interested in local politics than national politics. This one doesn't really relate at all, and I would say is the least related answer. Sorry about that. So out of these, I would say these two, D and B, are mostly unrelated, but even then, C would be to strengthen, B could also maybe be used to strengthen, but A is the only one that really weakens, right? Does that make sense? So why does not begin? So the number of Irish who worship as Roman Catholics keeps dropping every year. How would that weaken the argument, right? Well, it doesn't make any claim So the only way to weaken his argument, which is that the martyrs are important in modern politics and history and culture, is to say that they're not important in modern culture, history, or whatever. If the number of Roman Catholics keeps dropping every year, that doesn't make any mention of whether or not the martyrs, the traditions, and all of that is still kept, right? So for example, certain martyrs have either statues of themselves or holidays named after them or something like that named after them. So if the number of Catholics keeps dropping, but those holidays are still observed, those statues are still kept up, all of that's still in play, and all of those ideas are still there that were established by those martyrs, then it doesn't matter that the number of Catholics keeps dropping because it still has an impact. Even more so, it means that the martyrs have transcended the religion. Even those who are not religious still are impacted by the martyrs and are still kind of under their influence, right? That's why it's not. Yeah, exactly. Opa mentioned, could we eliminate B because there's no political aspect? That's exactly why you would eliminate B, because there's no mention of politics in B, right? In order to weaken the author's claim, it has to somehow be related to politics, because that is one of the main things that the author claims. And so the answer should have some element of politics in it. And politics in A, it refers to worldly matters, refers to politics as well. So that's where the answer is.
Yeah, but then I got confused because we're looking for something that weakened it. And we know the main idea
Exactly.
politics and the history. So,
but if the main, yeah,
you know, I would think it would, it's most weakened. Okay, politics would strengthen. Got it. We got it.
right. So regardless, it has to at least involve politics somehow. Whether what it depends on is which way it either strengthens or weakens, but it has to involve politics somehow. Otherwise, it's not related to the question at all. It's not related to the argument at all if it's not involved with politics. It can't strengthen or weaken if it has nothing to do with politics. And if we actually, and this is the last slide, so if you guys want to hear this explanation, feel free, or if you have any questions, but otherwise we're going to end after this. But looking at these questions, does this relate to the author's argument is the first question, right? If it doesn't relate to politics, you just cross it out here and that's it, the answer is done. If it does relate to politics, then you look at, does it strengthen or weaken, right? Or does it relate more, or does it strengthen, weaken? If it doesn't relate to politics, it doesn't even pass like the first step, and it just gets eliminated. But if we want to look at, for example, this one, both C and A are related to politics, but C is so like this one I would say is more strengthen, whereas this one is more weaken, right? They're both related to politics, but just in different ways. And one of those ways is by strengthening, one of those ways is by weakening, but they're both related to politics. D also relates to politics, but so again, going back to my 3, it does relate to politics, so it passes the first step, but it has to do with local versus national politics, which has nothing to do with the actual argument itself. So like you would eliminate it here at the second question. Does it address the author's main evidence or reasoning? No, it doesn't. So it would be here, wouldn't make it to this third question, or this third step, if that makes sense. So yes, it does relate to politics, but it's not related to the actual argument itself, which has to do with martyrs and yeah. Okay. Any other questions about anything we've covered so far, or anything you guys want me to go over? Because this is the final slide, so thank you very much for coming. Again, here's my email. We'll get this PowerPoint and recording out to you on the GroupMe. office hours tomorrow night. If you have any further questions about any topics, or if you want to come in with practice questions or anything you want me to answer or go over, please feel free. Otherwise, I'll be taking questions for a little bit right now, maybe another 10 minutes. So please feel free to stay and ask questions. Yeah, thank you all for coming. If you are done, thank you all for coming. We'll make sure to get everything out to you as soon as possible, and have a great night and a happy 4th of July.
Sorry, I had just one question. I think it was passage 2, the B, the explanation for B. I was I know I shouldn't be listening to other like exam crackers or all of that, but sometimes they were saying to use a question stem to if we really didn't know what the passage was, to use a question stem to eliminate wrong answers. And I was trying to do that, but I looked at the question and it was asking about the 5th paragraph, like you said, so it was more specific. But then I was looking at the question stem, not reading the 5th paragraph, and I was seeing there's the mention of Irish martyrs in B, Irish martyrs in C. And so I knew these two are the same, so chances are that they are not the right answer. So I was able to narrow to A and D. So now A mentioned Ireland and D mentioned non-worshippers. How was I supposed to know, having not read the 5th paragraph? I know we had to read it, that A then D.
So firstly, I would highly recommend reading it. Secondly, I don't like that. That doesn't always work. That's like a last, like you're super desperate and you have absolutely no idea what's going on. Because look, if you actually look, firstly, this whole paragraph and this whole passage is about Irish martyrs. So if the answer didn't include Irish martyrs, you 100% know that the answer is wrong, because it wasn't even on topic if you didn't have Irish martyrs. But look, B, C, and D all had Irish martyrs. Right. And that's actually one of the reasons you can eliminate A, is because it had nothing to do with Irish martyrs, so it wasn't related to the question or to the passage.
Okay.
So I don't like that. That's like, I don't really like that.
Okay, so don't do that then. Okay, just read up, go back.
So that's useful in specific situations where two questions, not about the same topic, but they're exactly they say the same thing essentially as each other. So if you notice, like these two, they both mention Irish martyrs, but they're saying very different things. So it's not, you wouldn't be able to eliminate it that way. If they were saying the same thing, essentially, then you could eliminate it. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the point is to go ahead and read the paragraph. And
yeah, the best way is to read the paragraph. That's like,
and
like something like
answer. Sorry? Since you said they both, why was B the best answer again? Just because
the best answer was D, and it's just because the 5th paragraph just talked mostly about this. Right. So again, C was more related to the passage as a whole. C was basically the passage as a whole. Irish martyrs are a central component of Irish history. That's what the passage as a whole, you could say, is the main idea, but not necessarily the 5th paragraph.
And B?
And B, a few Irish martyrs. So it said they were unknown and not very popular, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist. There were a lot of Irish martyrs. It's just people outside Ireland didn't know about them, and they weren't very popular outside of Ireland. They weren't very well known, but that doesn't mean they're not there.
Okay, and it was a part of the main, and it was, I think, the main ideas to not necessarily the 5th paragraph main idea. Okay, that's it. Yeah. I'll see you in office hours tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No problem. Have a great night. Okay, and somebody asked in the chat to go over the last question one more time. Okay. Which of the following statements are true? If the following statements are true, which would most weaken the author's argument? First step, what is the author's argument? And we have to figure out, we have to figure out what the author's argument first. That's the step one. The author's argument is that Irish martyrs started out as religious. For religious purposes, martyrs, are religious with the Catholic Church, but they've transcended that and are a very key aspect of Irish politics, Irish identity, Irish history, and Irish culture, even in modern times, right? They've transcended the religious aspect. They're very important now. How would you weaken that argument? The only way to weaken that argument is by having something that goes directly against it. The only way to go directly against it is by showing that the Irish martyrs are not relevant in modern society and that there's no link between the old Catholic martyrs and modern politics, modern culture, modern whatever in Ireland. Out of all of these choices, A is the best one that does that because the Irish believe that religious matters should be kept distinct from worldly matters. The Irish believe that the religious matters, like the martyrs, which are part of the Catholic Church, should be kept distinct from worldly matters like politics, history, stuff like that, and identity and whatever. Well, then, if they should be kept separate, that means you shouldn't. That means you shouldn't have the martyrs influencing modern politics or modern identity, right? And that goes against it. Looking at C, which is what you said you picked, Irish political figures are still quick to claim their affiliation with the Roman Church. So this is actually the opposite. Irish political figures are, well, it could be considered the opposite in a way because Irish political figures are still quick to show that they are influenced by the Roman Catholic Church, that they are influenced by the church, by religion, by the martyrs, by all of that that's part of the church, right? If you say that modern politics, modern Irish politics are influenced by the church, that's exactly what the author is saying in his argument. So it's actually, in order for C to be the correct answer, it would have to be strengthen, not weaken, okay? Yeah. Oh, I think the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah, the Irish Church is Catholic. I believe the English Church is not Catholic. It's not Protestant. I believe it's like Baptist or something. I'm not sure. Not a politics expert or a religious expert, but I believe that it's Anglican or Baptist or something. Yeah. Yeah, I guess if that in that sense maybe, but yeah, you have to. I think they did mention somewhere here. I'm trying to find it where it was. Yeah, martyrs and saints continue to be relevant to the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah. It was in the first paragraph. So yeah, be careful and read. If there's anything you don't know, try and find it in the passage. Especially if it's about history, something like this, they would have it in the passage. So if you weren't sure, go back and the answer has to be in the passage. They won't expect you to know these connections. Right? Any other questions from anybody before we wrap up for tonight? And as note, we will have office hours tomorrow night at 8:30. So if you have any questions that you find afterwards, please feel free to come, and that is more one-on-one. We can get a chance to look at practice questions and stuff like that if you bring in any question you have. Okay. If there are no further questions, we're going to end here. Thank you all for joining. Have a great night and happy 4th of July. Bye-bye.